Hello, everyone. You're very welcome along this evening. My name is Kathy Ann Redden, and I'm delighted to welcome you here tonight to tonight's webinar on journeying with your child on the sacrament of confirmation. The purpose of tonight's gathering is to offer you support as you journey with your child as they prepare to receive the sacrament of confirmation and how to support them in this very special year. In a moment, we'll hear from our guest speaker. Then there will be a time of short reflection and then an opportunity to ask questions or respond to the input given by our guest speaker. My colleague Francis Rowland will compile your questions and responses and then present them to our speaker. During the time of reflection, feel free to type in your questions and responses into the Q&A button or type into the chat box. Our guest speaker tonight is no stranger to the Diocese of Kerry. We've had the privilege of his knowledge and insight into pre-sacramental preparation for both First Holy Communion and confirmation over the years. Dr. Dan O'Connell is a lecturer in Mary Immaculate College in Limerick. Dan has been very involved in the development of the current Grow and Love ORI programme taught in primary schools and is a parent to two young children himself. So tonight, Dan will offer us an insight into journeying with your child from both an academic and personal perspective. Dan, it's great to have you here with us this evening. You're very, very welcome.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be with you now. So, Kathy, I'll start away, will I?
Absolutely, go
Perfect.
ahead.
Okay, folks, lovely to join with you. Let me share my screen and put up some slides here as we start. I'd like to begin, I suppose, just with a question to you. And I suppose what I'd love us to do is to think for a moment, can you remember your own confirmation? And what does it mean to you? So you might be watching this with a family member, you might be watching this with somebody who's making their confirmation. But if you made your confirmation, and perhaps not everybody did, but if you did, can you remember where you were living at the time? What school you were in? Maybe your teacher? Was it a bishop who confirmed you? What name you took? Did the day mean something to you? Was it significant for different reasons? Was there some sort of celebration? So that's the first thing I'd love to think about. Second question is this. Why is the confirmation of your son or daughter important to you? Now, I appreciate in the question there's a presumption made that it is important. And in all honesty, it may not be hugely important to you. It's just that your son or daughter is in sixth class and confirmation is what's happening. And they're just going to go along with it. But I'd love you to take a moment to think about both those questions as we begin to move into reflection on confirmation. So I'm going to stop talking literally for a minute. So if you're with somebody there watching this, maybe chat to them about your own confirmation or check in, is the making of confirmation important for your son or daughter? And if so, why? And if not, why? Okay, the minute starts now. Okay, I'm not going to talk. Have a think or jot a note. If you're on your own, maybe jot a note to one or other of those questions. Okay, let's keep moving. You probably know this reflection, but I just want to kind of lead with it and then kind of talk a little bit about it. It's called Footprints in the Sand. It says, one night I dreamed a dream. I was walking along the beach with my Lord, and across the sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, I noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one to my Lord. When the last scene of my life shot before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. There was only one set of footprints. I realized that this was at the lowest and saddest times of my life, And this always bothered me, and I questioned the Lord about my dilemma. Lord, you told me when I decided to follow you, you would walk and talk with me all the way. But I'm aware that during the most troublesome times of my life, there's only one set of footprints. I just don't understand why, when I need you most, you leave me. He whispered, my precious child, I love you and will never leave you, never ever during your trials and testings. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. The reflection raises lots of points. I think one of the things that it offers is one of comfort. Sometimes when we feel alone, maybe we're not as alone as we feel. I think the reflection also gives energy, that there is someone with us, helping us, despite the fact that we don't maybe feel very powerful at the time, but somehow we are being lifted in the moment, and perhaps it gives direction. And I think these are important qualities for young people today who are making confirmation, that they have a sense of comfort, they have a sense of energy in their lives, and also a sense of direction. For there's a lot of change in their lives coming, because they're beginning to move from primary school into secondary school and other things besides. Because they live in a world where there's lots of options, lots of choices, and it's hard sometimes to find their way with their friends, find their way in school. They might be playing football or with other groups, and just navigating all that is tricky and it's tiring. And we know ourselves with our children, friendship groups and social media can be an incredibly tricky space to navigate for our children, and one that takes a great deal of care. They're also very aware of the world around them in which they live, the news they're watching, whether it's around Gaza or their climate, and COP coming up at the end of the month. There's a certain background horizon that isn't of lots of good news. And that's why I think thinking about confirmation is really, really important, because there are certain qualities and dispositions and gifts being offered in this sacrament that I think are very important for children, especially at this time in their lives. One of the priests here in Ennis a number of years ago did up the fruits of the Spirit like this. He put it on a card, a nice kind of large card, and he gave to all the parents who came to the talk. I can't give you this card now, but just for yourself, for ideas that if you're creative around digital tech and things like that, it might be a nice thing to print out for yourselves, just to take a photograph of it now. It's on the screen for yourselves and say, you know, I could do that on my computer, with the view to printing it out quite large and hanging it up. I had a friend of mine, Trish Kieran, who was supposed to give the talk tonight, and Trish said that when one of her children was making their confirmation, she printed out the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, like lovely qualities. And while her son was in school, she went up to his bedroom, and on his wall in his bedroom, she put this up on his wall. And he came home and said, "Oh, ma'am, what are you doing? Like, where did that come from?" It says, between now and your confirmation, I'm going to ask you every night as you go to bed, and I'm going up with them upstairs with you as well. I'm going to ask you to pick one of those fruits, and where did you notice it? Where did you notice peace today? Did somebody give you peace? Did you bring a little bit of peace? And she's not going to go into it, a big explanation about any of those, but simply to ask him to become aware. And she found that, you know, at the beginning it was maybe a little bit awkward, but as time wore on, it became more easy. It became the part of the pattern of going to bed, of trying to attune our senses into noticing the fruits of God's Spirit. Or what you could do is, you see these for sale in different shops, Veritas and things like that, the gifts of the Holy Spirit. We'll talk a bit about these in a moment. But your knowledge, fortitude, understanding, piety, counsel, you could do the same thing with that. You see, these gifts, I think, are really, really, really important today for our young people, the gift of wisdom. I think it's so important today that children have a sense of seeing the larger picture, if you like, trying to see things from God's perspective. Do you know, sometimes they say about children, sometimes they say, "Oh, she was here before," that there's a certain sense of wisdom about her. She kind of sees around corners and she doesn't get caught in on petty things, that there's a certain sense of don't jump in. She has this ability just not to react, that she has this kind of capacity to see the bigger thing. That's a great gift that we all need. A gift of understanding. My goodness, just turn on the news today, all over the place. we see the diminished capacity of where to understand the perspective of another. I used to live in America years ago, and it's become so divided. And the capacity to understand the point of view of another is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Surely this is a gift that is much needed amongst our young people today. Gift of right judgment, another one, to tell the difference between what's right and what's wrong. Not what feels right for me, not necessarily what's my truth per se, but simply what's right. You just shouldn't tell lies. There are things you should or shouldn't do. And that our young people have had that sense of that moral compass. So we just don't do things because of the feelings. We do things because we know certain things are right and certain things are wrong. The problem is, though, many of us know what's right to do and what's wrong that we shouldn't do. The difficulty is we lack the courage to do it. And so one of the gifts of God's Spirit is for courage, that through confirmation, the courage that's there in your children already would grow, that they'll be able to stand up for what they know is the right thing to do, whether in the classroom and, somebody's making snide remarks about one of their friends. Do they kind of pretend I didn't really hear that because they don't want to get involved? Or do they say, hold on a second? But if they do that, they might be at risk of being on the receiving end of those remarks. So you've got to be prudential as well, but there is a need for courage, because Pope Francis talks a great deal about the culture of indifference in the world today, that we live in this globalized world where there's a certain amount of indifference, that we pretend we don't see things. Another gift of the Holy Spirit is knowledge. It's not so much academic knowledge, maths and Gaeilge and science, things like that. It's more what's of value that our sons and daughters at this stage in their life, there's all kinds of possibilities opening up to them in the world, which is wonderful. But we want them to know what's important, like family is important, that they have a great sense of belonging to us, to this parish, to this place, that they'd value that and not treat it very lightly, that they'd value telling the truth, that they'd value fair play. And they're playing, like shaking hands with the teammates. Like one of the lads who plays with my son, they were playing a game, a football a while ago. He wouldn't shake hands with the opposite team at the end. He was so browned off. So it's not easy to shake hands with somebody when you've lost the game, but there's a certain thing of, you need to step up and you need to shake hands. That's important. There's a certain sense of value in that. So these sorts of things are kind of important, that our children have a sense of what's valuable. But also another one is really important is reverence. And reverence, what's reverence? Reverence is kind of the ability to notice what's sacred, what's holy, what's precious. So there's a lovely poem, or this is only a very small part of the poem, by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And she says, I'll read it, I'll say these 4 lines twice. Earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only those who see takes off their shoes. The rest sit around it and pluck blackberries. Do you see? Earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only those who see takes off their shoes. That's the reverence. The rest sit around it and pluck blackberries. I think we live in a culture where it's hard sometimes to foster a sense of reverence, but regard, respect, care for other people. Just look at the social media platforms that our children operate on, and there's such coarseness and such kind of disparagement at times towards others. We live in a world where there's a great need for reverence. And finally, the last gift is wonder and awe in God's presence, that our children have this capacity. They do already, but as we grow a bit older, we can lose this capacity to kind of be surprised, to look at the stars at night. We get out of the car, we've picked our kids up from swimming or music or something, we come back, and as we close the door, the sky it's a dark night, we look up and God, you see the stars. And do we just stop then and say, my goodness, look at those? Or are we racing inside to the house? How do we foster that sense of attention to the more in life, to the mystery in life, to God in life, and just to be amazed at God's presence in our lives? So here's a little bit of homework for you. I'd love you to look at these gifts: wisdom, understanding, right judgment, courage, knowledge, what's of value, reverence, wonder and awe in God's presence. Yeah, have a look at these gifts of God's Spirit. I want you for a moment now, which one do you notice in your child? So when you think of your son or daughter, do you think, oh my God, she's always so brave? You know, that just jumps out straight at you because she's always led with her chin. It hasn't served her enormously well at times because she gets hurt. But she's braver than you. You love the courage she has and you admire it. Or maybe the sense of reverence, a sense of regard that your son has for other people, for animals and other people. He is just this lovely sense of regard for other people. There's a reverence. And with reverence comes gratitude. Because with reverence comes a sense of things are a gift. And the best response to receiving a gift is to say thank you. So you notice that in your son. So let me be quiet for a second, but I'd love you to look through that list and try to notice something. You say, I see that. And what I'd love you to do is make a promise to yourself that either tonight or tomorrow morning, you'll say it to your son or daughter and say, Pork, come up here for a second. Pork, can I just say, I was at this talk last night and it just occurs to me. I want to say, I love the fact that you are always so understanding. I love the way you can always see both sides. I just love that about you. I just want to say it to you. Okay, let me stop talking for 15 seconds. Have a look at the list and kind of see which one chimes most for you, and then make a decision to say it to your son or daughter. Okay. One thing, so that's going on at confirmation is it's a reiteration of commitments already made in baptism. So when your child is baptized, the priest turned to the parents and the godparents and asked them 3 questions. And now those questions are being asked to your own son or daughter in their confirmation. The first question they're going to get asked is this: do you believe in God? Now, the stakes are high because, with confirmation, often people might receive a smartphone, so there's a big prize, but also they might receive money. So they're aware that they're going to make probably hundreds of euro. I remember hearing a story about a young kid who got a smartphone for his confirmation, and during the day he was getting the money that he was being given, but then he was photographing the money during the day and then sending the photograph off to his friends and asking them, how much have you got? And they'd send back, I'm up to 600. How much are you up to? I'm up to 800. And somebody came back with 1,200, saying, my goodness, how did you get 1,200? And they said, my parents are having a party in the house. So what you got to do is get as many adults into the house as possible. Anyway. So I say that in a bit facetious, but nonetheless, it's kind of, it's a very real background. So part of the commitment in confirmation is our sons and daughters are going to get asked by the bishop or the priest this question during confirmation. They're going to be asked this question: do you believe in God? That's a big question. And you see, if they don't believe in God, what are they making confirmation for? And that's easy to say and harder to live out in practice because everybody in the class is making confirmation. But if you don't believe in God, they don't believe in God, again, I think we need to think about why we're making it. Or we've actually never really thought about the question in our house, maybe, and just you think, I need to think about it. Because it's hard for the teacher. The teacher asks our children that question. It's hard for the child maybe to really be honest. Or the priest comes in, it's hard for the child to be honest. That's a question for us in the car, coming back from a football match or music or swimming or drama or whatever it is, and just wondering with them. Now, the problem for us asking that question to our children is they're going to turn around to us and say, well, do you? And then we've got to think, do I? Do I think there's someone more to life or something more to life? Do I? So if our children can turn around and say, yes, I believe in God, they're on the road. But they're going to get asked the second question: do you believe in Jesus Christ? And the same thing applies here. Now, I know you're probably saying, God damn, they're only 12 years old. But yeah, they are 12. So they can't think of it like an adult. But nonetheless, do they know anything about Jesus Christ? Has there been a good religious education program in the school? Do you is there a Bible in your house? Have you told Bible stories to your kids while reading, Harry Potter and all kinds of stuff as well to them? Do they know anything about this person, Jesus Christ? Do they like him? Do they think he stood for anything that's of value today? Is he alive today? That sort of thing. And was he just an historical figure? Or is he close to them today by going to Holy Communion? Do they draw closer to this person, Jesus Christ? So that somewhere along the line needs to be discussed. We're almost there, but they're going to get asked a third question in this. Do you believe in the Holy Spirit? Now, I know this is a Trinitarian thing, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And it's all of the one as well. It's all of God. But nonetheless, I suppose, is God active in the world today? Does God's Spirit help us? Is God's Spirit in us, trying to build these gifts up in us? So these are questions we need to think about with our children. So confirmation is about listening to the promptings of God's Spirit in one's life, to live in a certain way, to do what we know is right, and to have the courage to do it. But the question for us as adults, how can we help our children to do this? To tune into this presence of God in their lives. So I like, for instance, if you're dropping one of your kids to school and she's worried about going in, and because things are awkward in the classroom with 2 or 3 friends now, along with giving her good advice, we just say, hey, Paula, will we say a little prayer to the Holy Spirit that you've got courage and wisdom? Will we say that? Okay, and just for 30 seconds in the car, a long way away from the school. Is that something we reach for as parents? So maybe that's something we could do, is place somewhere visibly on the fridge or in our children's bedroom or something, a printout of the fruits of the Spirit or the gifts of the Spirit. So to make it visible. Or like I say, take a photograph of that now on the screen and say, I could do that on the computer, or get one of the children to do it on the computer, and make it visible. But it's a time of decision ultimately. I know they're only young, but nonetheless, it is kind of a transitioning time for them, and we need to involve them in that decision. But that's awkward. And I appreciate that, because the group is really, really, really important for this age group. When they're 12 or 13, belonging is very important, and you don't want to be the one standing out. So I appreciate there's a tension here that the value might be, sticking with the group is far more important here. And I appreciate that. So this is not simple. It's complicated. But one of the things I want to think about, just a little bit of the background music to this as well, is, maybe some of us are around in 1979 in the Pope's visit to Phoenix Park. I think there were like 1 million people in Phoenix Park, a huge amount. When Pope Francis came in 2018, Phoenix Park wasn't half as full. Ireland has changed a great deal. And there's a lot of different attitudes towards religion and religious belief in Ireland today than there was in 1979. So we've got to ask ourselves, is confirmation really a social convention, a rite of passage in 6th class? If you go to a Catholic school, you kind of have to go through it. Or is it the next step on the journey of faith? As children begin to deepen and widen and broaden their sense of what God is and church is, and a belief in God. Just to go sideways for a second, there's lots of talk about the world I inhabit, where I teach religious education at Mary Immaculate College. A lot of talk about well-being. There's tons of research that demonstrates a clear correlation between religious practice and well-being. And lots of it is done in peer-reviewed journals. If anybody's interested in it, just ask me and I'll send you all the data. But it's there. Here's a piece of research done by some researchers in Harvard talking about children and religion. It says they looked at 5,000 children over 8 years. 5,000 children over 8 years. And the researchers at Harvard found this. Children and teens who attend religious services at least weekly will be, as young adults, about 18% more apt to report higher happiness between the age of 23 and 30 than those who didn't. So that's interesting. It's not that the religious services are true in and of themselves, just the habit of attending a religious service weekly predisposes somebody to being happier later in young adulthood. About 29% more likely to be volunteers. So again, in a religious tradition, the orientation isn't always inward, it's also outward. You're called to love God, but also love your neighbor. So there's an outward focus. There's a value system at play in many religious traditions, pretty much all the main religious traditions, which is about compassion for the other, especially those who are poor. And 33% less likely to use illegal drugs. So these religious practices don't just have a religious impact, they also have a social and physiological impact. Children and teens who pray or meditate at least daily will be, as young adults, about 16% more likely to report higher happiness. So children pray or meditate daily they're more likely to be happier. 30% less likely to have sex at a young age, and 40% less likely to have a sexually transmitted disease. Point being that religion has an impact on our well-being when it's practiced. This is Lydia Mannion. Lydia is a newly appointed faculty member in Mary Immaculate College, and she has looked at this area of well-being in religion. I just want to put up 4 quotes from young adolescents that she talked about the importance of religion in their lives. One said, "Without religion, I don't think that I'd be able to cope with the whole lockdown. And then when you lose someone, like, I think without religion and without being able to kind of have God as this person to come to and be able to believe that my granddad has gone somewhere better, like, I don't think I'd be able to cope without religion. Yeah, it definitely gets me through the tough times." Somebody else said, "A connection with God because you feel that you have something special and that you are someone special to God. And that's really helpful. That you are someone special to God. And that's really helpful." It kind of helps me stay grounded and, not get really flustered or overwhelmed. I think praying is the main thing. If I'm having a stressful day or just kind of feeling a bit overwhelmed, I can just kind of sit down and pray and relax. And the last one, I think it kind of helps me make friends as well, which is good for my well-being. Kind of being social and active with people, both my age and other ages around the parish, that I can meet people who feel either the same or differently about religion, and we can kind of talk about it. So there's lots of evidence to show practicing a religious tradition is good for your health, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and socially. So the question for us maybe as adults is, does confirmation promote the good health of our children, as opposed to just something narrow and to do with religion and God? And say, I suppose I'm claiming, actually, no, it's much wider than that, the impact of confirmation and participating in a religious tradition in a regular fashion. That it promotes resilience and well-being, mindfulness, bounce-back ability is a word I came across recently, but that does, going deeper in one's faith, foster those sorts of attributes today. And I'd say it does. Okay, let me begin to pull my few thoughts together at this. In what I've been talking about, is there anything you find yourself agreeing with? And if so, why? What was it that I think there's sense there. What do you disagree with? What do you find yourself saying, I don't know that I go with Dan in that direction. I think about it differently. So what's that about for you? And my other question is this: what do you need to do as a parent or guardian to help your child make their confirmation? Is there something you need to do? So the schools are doing their things. They work hard there. The parish do their things. But ultimately, it's up to us as parents. Like, we're the main people here. And sometimes we farm it off to the parish and to the school. It's worth us thinking, what do we need to do? Maybe we need to think about belief in God and Jesus, or whatever it may be. So let me finish talking there, and I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it back to Kathy-Ann.
Thank you so much, Dan. So now, folks, there will be an opportunity. There'll be a short interval just if you have any questions or responses to Dan and the input that he gave tonight. And in a few minutes, Frances Rowland will present those for us. Frances, do you have some questions for us?
I have indeed. The questions are arriving in fast and furious, Dan, after your great presentation. So the first question I'm going to pose to you is, you mentioned having this conversation with our children about the preparation for confirmation, what confirmation means, and then do they really want to kind of put themselves forward at this time for confirmation? How do I have that conversation? Parents are asking.
Yeah, I think how you do it is really hard. I think we have to have it is the thing. So, and then I think it doesn't have to be, right, sit down at the kitchen table and we're going to actually have this conversation. Do you believe in God? We're going to be talking about the confirmation day with our children as we go along. And I think it's when we collect them from football and we're in the car and you might say, do you know what it is? Your confirmation makes me think a little bit about, and we bring it on ourselves. And we say a little bit about, sure, as I remember I made my confirmation, I thought about God then, I thought about this then. And I'd love to know, what do you think about that? Like, I know we're going to have a fabulous day, and I know the family are coming over, and that's going to be fantastic. And I know you're going to get a smartphone. You're going to, like, that's great. So it's a lovely time to celebrate our children. There's no question. But to add, then to slide down a little bit deeper with it, I said, do you know, what does it mean to you deep down? Like, is there somewhere deep down inside yourself that this makes some sense to you? Or what questions do you have about it? And I think the danger sometimes as parents, when we say to that church, what questions do you have about it? We think we've got to have the answers. We don't, I don't think. We've just got to hold really good questions. So they ask a question. Look, we don't have to give the answer. We just have to say, that's a really good question. And I think that's really worth thinking about. I really do. Like, and I don't have any answer for that, but I'd love to talk to somebody about that. And ask maybe our child, how do you think we might think about that question? Because I love the question. They might say, well, if God is there and God's so loving, and why is there all going on in Gaza? And why did my aunt die? And our response is, that's great. They're great questions. I love those questions. I think that's fantastic you're asking them. I'd love to think about them some more. And then with your son or daughter in the car, say, and you might say, I don't know where to go with that. What do you think we can do? So she and he, with you, guides the direction which the question takes us. Because I have things I think I would like the children to know, but it's good for me to stop and say, what does the child want to know?
Yes.
I think to elicit that. The problem is we feel quite vulnerable, I think, because we think we'll be really shown up for being hopeless when it comes to religion or something. And no, I think it's real to be authentic and true and vulnerable. And I think our children would like that, I imagine, that's the initial thoughts to what you're saying.
And it also strikes me that, in you saying that, Dan, you're acknowledging that, the young children today and the young, almost adults, the 12 and 13-year-olds, they have had a different experience of religion to us. So therefore, they're coming with new experiences of God, new experiences of prayer that weren't there when I was in school anyway. So maybe it is maybe being open to hearing what they have to say. There's great questions coming in here. One is around anything that would support, us chatting about faith with our children. And somebody else has said, look, can we see those slides again? They were great. Now, I want to say to people, we will have this talk up on our YouTube channel over the next couple of days. So you can watch it back as many times as you like. And, there's some great slides that you show there that might provoke a conversation. Are there other places people can look for supporting materials?
I suppose the one that comes to mind first, in Veritas have a publication on the confirmation, this kind of it's kind of a partner book, which I think is quite helpful. So if people went on the Veritas website, the Grow in Love program itself, I was involved in helping that to come about. There's actually very good resources, some very good videos that are used in 6th class. If somebody was so inclined to ask the teacher to give them access to that, and with their child, there's a great video where children who've made their confirmation are talking about what they're going to do with their gifts and put them at the service of the community. And I love that, because I think some people think confirmation is the destination point, whereas confirmation is the departure point, really. And you can understand why it's the destination point. It's the end of primary school, and it's the last thing we do. It's a big celebration, so it's great. But really, it should be the departure. We're in the departure lounge now, and we've got all these gifts. And how do we make them at the service of the community? So I love that video where you've got 7 or 8 children talking, not children, 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds talking. And I think that would prompt conversations amongst your own children. Like, you're going to get €600. You're going to keep all that for yourself? Would you give €30 to Troca or something like that? Is that all for you? So I think there's a certain outward push that needs to happen. And so those videos are the property, I think, of Veritas. But if you talk to your class teacher and say, is there a chance we could get access to some of those? I imagine teachers could make that possible.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And there's a great question in here. It's about sort of, my child believes in God, but would have questioned, why are they being confirmed? I explained that it's part of being Catholic and it's one of the sacraments, but I think it's almost like a practical point of view. Maybe sometimes because we haven't seen the ceremony, maybe since we made confirmation ourselves or whatever, we forget the little bits that are related to kind of growing up and stretching out. Could you say a little bit about that, Dan?
Yeah, I think humans are symbolic people. We need to ritualize moments in our lives that we come to certain, like, so births, we ritualize a birth in some way. So baptism was always the way, but now there's naming ceremonies. Humanists have naming ceremonies. So we need to kind of mark the occasion at certain stages in our lives. So confirmation is kind of a marking of a moment where somebody's making a decision to say, you know, I'd love us to go a bit deeper. So when people get engaged, there's an engagement, you know, two people love each other, say, let's get engaged. And then let's get married. You know, they don't do that in private, or there's a moment to mark a shift in the relationship and say, we're going to get engaged and we're going to make this relationship a little bit deeper, and we're going to make a bit of a commitment to one another. And then we're really going to make it when we get married. So I think it's a bit like that in confirmation, that we kind of, you know, when we're small, we make Holy Communion and we go to confession, that's steps along the way. But there comes a point that says, do you want to make this, keep at this, make it a little bit deeper? Because the moment then makes us have those thoughts, that confirmation prompts these questions and say, actually, do you know this faith thing makes no sense to me. I don't believe. I remember my nephew saying, I don't believe in the resurrection at all. I just don't think that's true at all, you know. And now he actually did make his confirmation, but he had all these questions. So I think confirmation, nearly part of the function is to prompt. Do I want to go ahead with this or delay it? Or not at all. So I think,
and that answer might have bits of both. You know, it's not all one or the other, is what I'm hearing you say.
No
more than ourselves at any age in life. You know, what makes most sense to me? There's a great question in here, or a great comment in here, you know, saying that I feel sometimes the pressure to attend Mass regularly. While I see this as being important, I also feel it's more important that as a family, live our lives in a way that God would want. You know, for example, by helping others and doing good. So sometimes we kind of put them one against the other. It's this or that. Whereas we're trying to do both, aren't we? Or as much as we can.
For sure. And you see, one should feed into the other. Do you know, like one should, like, by going to Mass, it should enable us to, you know, live as God wants us to do. You know, we think of the Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You know, so the kindness we show in families, the generosity to people and we work with, you know, how we work in the community, the volunteers we do with the under 12s, and how to play football and showing up, like, that's all building God's reign and God's dream for the world.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, and we've got to be so careful that we don't say that's the sacred part, that's Mass, that's the holy part, and then there's the under 14 football I do, you know, on a Thursday night and the match of the weekend. No, that's also sacred. That's the thing of reverence. That we begin to notice the sacred nature of everything, and we try and respond as best we can. And the thing of Mass is hard. Like, our age, like, God, to get a 12-year-old to come to Mass, like, that's hard. And for Mass to make sense to young people like that's hard. But I think you're right. We've got to keep it in the round. Yeah.
And I think you said something interesting there in terms of what the young people were saying about volunteering and extending themselves. That we do want young people in our lives, I suppose, that are extended towards others. So how does confirmation be a celebration whereby, you know, they're on the cusp of teenagehood and adulthood and giving themselves, you know, out to others more than they could as children. It sounds lovely. One last question. Should it be celebrated in secondary school rather than in primary school? I'm sure you've heard this question before.
Great. It's a great question. And there's lots of reasons for both. And, you know, for either, you could easily argue very easily it should be done in secondary schools, because children maybe at 16. And also the advantage of that would be it would give them something to do in the parish. So often when they leave at 12, their connection with church just finishes. You know, they go to secondary school and there's no connection really with the parish. And then maybe some bits done in the school, but generally there's not. So the advantage of, say, confirmation being when you're 16 or something, there could be preparatory programs done well that would tie the young people still into the parish, like a volunteer program to work with folks maybe who need help. And you could tie them into that as a preparation for the confirmation. So it would have that advantage of keeping the Christian community, if you like, in a continuum. It has the disadvantage of, I suppose, the fear amongst some probably is that they'll just be gone.
Yes.
You know, once primary school finishes, we have a chance to talk to them and wonder with them and pray to them. And you know, they're open to us maybe as adults. We've got them when they're 16, there's so much coming their way. There's so much noise in their lives. The last thing they want is confirmation, but maybe that's the very time they need it. So it goes round and round. Certainly in England, there's diocese there, and at 16 is the age, and there's pros and cons.
Okay. And just a real sense of thank you. It's been really very helpful to hear this, and even the mention of some children who've joined just to hear, and really appreciated it, Dan. So with that, I'll hand over to Kathy Ann, and thank you, Dan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Francis, for doing the Q&A for us. We really appreciate it. And a very special thank you to Dr. Dan O'Connell for speaking to us tonight. I think it's safe to say that you've given us a lot of food for thought, and we thank you. And then finally, to all the families, the children and parents who've joined us this evening, we just want to wish you all the very best for this very exciting year ahead, and good night.